It all began on a quiet Friday afternoon. The Miller family lived in a calm suburban neighborhood where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. 16-year-old Ethan was thrilled when his parents announced they would be leaving for the weekend to attend a family wedding out of town. For Ethan, this meant one thing: freedom. No curfews, no chores, no constant questions about homework. Just him, the house, and the entire weekend to enjoy. As his parents packed their luggage into the car, Ethan pretended to be responsible. His mother repeated her list of reminders. Lock the doors. Don't open to strangers. Call us if you need anything. His father added with a half-joking tone, and don't throw a party. Ethan laughed and promised he would behave. But deep inside, he couldn't wait to stay up late, play his games without interruption, and order pizza whenever he wanted. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ethan waved as his parents' car disappeared down the street. For the first time in his life, the house felt like it truly belonged to him. Every room was silent, every corner filled with possibilities. He jumped onto the couch, scrolled through streaming apps, and smiled at the thought of an entire weekend of freedom. But then, as he grabbed his phone, a strange feeling brushed against him, like the weight of the empty house pressed down in an unusual way. The ticking clock in the hallway sounded louder than usual. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was heavy. He shook off the thought quickly. "It's just me being paranoid," he whispered to himself. Ethan had no idea that this weekend alone would turn into the darkest and most unforgettable experience of his life. The moment the car disappeared from sight, Ethan felt like a king in his castle. For the first time ever, there were no rules, no watchful eyes, and no one to tell him when to sleep or what to do. He rushed back into the living room, tossed his shoes aside, and grabbed a bag of crisps. His favorite game console was waiting for him, and with a single click, the room lit up with colors from the TV screen. Hours slipped away quickly. Ethan lost himself in online matches, shouting into his headset, laughing with friends who had no idea he was home alone for the entire weekend. Between games, he ordered pizza, soda, and snacks, something his mother would never have allowed so late at night. The smell of cheese and garlic filled the house, making it feel less empty. By midnight, Ethan sprawled on the couch, surrounded by empty cans and pizza boxes. He scrolled through horror movies, grinning at the thought of watching them without anyone interrupting. With the lights dimmed, the glow from the TV gave the room a strange, flickering atmosphere. But every so often, he thought he heard something, the faint sound of movement upstairs or a soft creak in the hallway. At first, he ignored it, blaming the old house. He even laughed and said out loud, "Wow, this is exactly like one of those scary movies." The freedom was intoxicating, yet underneath it all, something felt off. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual, and the house, instead of feeling like his playground, began to feel alive, like it was quietly watching him. Still, Ethan brushed the thought aside. To him, this was the weekend of a lifetime. Little did he know, his so-called freedom was about to turn into a nightmare he couldn't escape. It was past 1 a.m. when Ethan finally switched off his game console. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He grabbed another soda, stretched, and decided to put on a scary movie before heading to bed. The glow from the TV filled the dark room, flickering across the walls. That's when he heard it, a faint creak. It sounded like a floorboard shifting somewhere upstairs. Ethan froze, the soda can halfway to his mouth. He held his breath, straining to listen. Nothing, just silence again. He exhaled and laughed nervously. "Relax, man. Houses make noises," he muttered. But minutes later, It came again, this time louder. A definite sound, as if someone had stepped carefully across the landing above him. Ethan paused the movie and looked toward the staircase, his heart beating faster. He tried to convince himself it was the wind, maybe the old wood settling. Still, something about the rhythm of the sound felt deliberate, too human. Gathering his courage, he tiptoed to the foot of the stairs and looked up. The hallway above was cloaked in darkness, the kind of black that seemed thicker than shadows. He flicked on the hallway light, but the bulb buzzed and failed to turn on. The silence pressed in again, heavy and suffocating. He swallowed hard and whispered to himself, "No one's here. You're just imagining things." Trying to shake off the fear, he returned to the couch, turned the volume higher, and forced himself to watch the movie. But deep inside, he knew. He hadn't imagined those footsteps. Someone, or something, had moved upstairs. And soon, he would find out the truth. The night dragged on, and Ethan tried his best to ignore the strange noises from upstairs. He convinced himself it was the house settling, maybe the wind. But deep down, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Around 2 a.m., he went into the kitchen for another snack. The dim light above the sink flickered slightly as he poured himself a glass of water. That's when he noticed it, the chair at the dining table. It had been pushed out, angled differently than before. He froze. Ethan was certain he hadn't touched it. Slowly, he pushed the chair back in, forcing a laugh. "Okay, maybe I just don't remember moving it," he told himself. But as he turned to leave, a soft scraping sound echoed behind him. He spun around. Another chair had shifted slightly across the tiled floor. Ethan's stomach dropped. His hands trembled as he whispered, "This isn't real. It can't be." Grabbing his phone flashlight, he swept the beam across the kitchen. Everything seemed still. The clock ticked loudly. The refrigerator hummed. But the air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. His backpack, which he had left near the front door, slid a few inches across the floor as if pulled by invisible hands. Ethan's breath hitched. He stumbled back, his heart racing so fast it hurt. The house no longer felt like his. Every object, every shadow seemed alive, watching, waiting. He backed away into the living room, clutching his phone like a weapon. The movie on the TV played quietly, but he could barely hear it over the pounding of his heartbeat. Something in that house was moving things, and Ethan was starting to realize he wasn't alone. By now, Ethan's nerves were stretched thin. He sat on the couch, his phone clutched in his hand, trying to calm down. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. He convinced himself to relax until the phone rang. The old landline on the wall, which hardly ever rang, suddenly came to life. Its shrill sound cut through the silence of the house, making Ethan jump so hard he nearly dropped his soda. He hesitated. Who could be calling at this hour? His parents wouldn't. They always used his mobile. With shaky steps, he picked up the receiver. "Hello." His voice cracked slightly. At first, there was nothing, just silence. Then, a faint sound emerged. A slow, raspy breath. Ethan frowned. "Hello. Who is this?" And then he heard it. A whisper, barely audible. "Hmm." The phone slipped from his hand, dangling by its cord. His skin crawled. Someone had whispered his name. But how? Who? Gathering courage, he lifted the phone again. "Stop messing with me. Who are you?" His voice trembled. The line crackled, and once again, that breathy whisper. "You're not alone." Ethan slammed the receiver back down, his chest heaving. He backed away from the phone, staring at it as though it were a living thing. His mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? Had one of his friends found out he was home alone? But no, the voice hadn't sounded like anyone he knew. It was deeper, older, unnatural. The house, which had once been his playground of freedom, now felt like a cage. The shadows seemed to thicken, the silence heavier than before. And now, a horrifying thought sank in. If the caller was telling the truth, then who or what was inside the house with him? The phone call had rattled Ethan's nerves to the core. He sat frozen, staring at the dark hallway, his ears straining for the slightest sound. Every creak, every tick of the clock felt amplified. He wanted to call his parents, but his pride whispered that he was overreacting. Then it happened. Without warning, the lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. The entire house was swallowed by darkness. Ethan gasped, his heart thundering in his chest. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The comforting glow of the TV vanished. The silence was deafening. Only his phone remained. A small circle of light from the flashlight app trembling in his hand. He shone it around the room, the beam catching the outlines of furniture, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. He whispered to himself, "It's just a power cut. That's all." But his voice didn't convince him. Something about the timing felt wrong. Why now? Why right after the phone call? He moved cautiously through the living room, the floorboards creaking under his feet. The beam of light shook as his hand trembled. Each shadow looked like it was moving, bending closer, waiting. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from upstairs, a loud thud, as though something heavy had fallen. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. He wanted to believe it was nothing, but deep inside he knew the sound was real. The house wasn't just dark. It was alive with something unseen, something that wanted him scared and alone. Clutching his phone like a weapon, Ethan whispered, "Please let the lights come back." But he already sensed this blackout wasn't an accident. Someone or something had planned it. The blackout dragged on, and the silence pressed harder against Ethan's ears. The only thing keeping him grounded was the shaky glow of his phone flashlight. He moved slowly through the hallway, his breath uneven, his every step echoing too loudly in the empty house. Then he froze. At the edge of the beam, something shifted. A shadow, quick but deliberate, darted across the upstairs landing. Ethan's chest tightened. He pointed the flashlight upwards, but the beam caught nothing. Just the dark hallway, empty and silent. "No, no way," he whispered. His mind screamed for an explanation. Maybe it was his imagination. Maybe the beam of light had been across a mirror. But deep down he knew better. He crept up the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. At the top, the air felt colder, heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. He swept the light across the hallway, his parents' bedroom, the guest room, the bathroom. All doors shut, but then movement again. A tall, thin shadow slipped across the hallway and vanished into the far room. Ethan's pulse raced. His throat went dry. He wanted to call out, but terror sealed his lips. The sound of soft breathing filled the air, faint but steady, coming from the darkness just beyond the flashlight's reach. Ethan's hand shook violently as he aimed the beam, but there was nothing, only empty space. And yet, he knew, he was no longer imagining things. Something was there with him. It was moving, watching, waiting. Ethan's worst fear was no longer the dark. It was the fact that the dark wasn't empty. Ethan's fear had reached its peak. Every shadow felt alive, every sound a threat. He wanted to run outside, but something compelled him to stay. He needed to know what was happening inside his home. Then he heard it, a dragging sound, slow, heavy, coming from beneath him, from the basement. Ethan froze in place. His parents rarely used the basement. It was mostly for storage. But now, something was moving down there. The sound of boxes shifting, objects scraping against concrete, echoed faintly through the floor. Clutching his phone, Ethan forced himself toward the basement door. His hand trembled as he reached for the knob. The metal felt ice cold, as if the basement air was seeping through. Swallowing hard, he pulled it open. A staircase plunged into total blackness. The smell hit him first, damp, musty, with something sour mixed in like rotting wood or worse. He shone his flashlight downward, each step creaking as he descended. Shadows stretched across the stone walls, and the deeper he went, the colder it became. At the bottom, the light caught something strange. A stack of boxes had been moved recently, shoved aside to reveal a space behind them. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped closer. His beam landed on the floor, and his stomach dropped. There were markings, scratches carved into the concrete, like someone had clawed desperately, try to get out. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the corner. Ethan whipped the light around, and for the briefest second, he saw it. A figure, tall, pale, crouched unnaturally in the shadows, watching him with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. The phone slipped slightly in his sweaty hands. He gasped, stumbling backward up the stairs. But one thing was certain now. This wasn't just in his head. Something had been living in the basement all along. By the time dawn approached, Ethan hadn't slept a single second. The horrifying discovery in the basement haunted every thought. He had locked the basement door and sat curled on the couch, gripping his phone as though it could protect him. Every creak in the house made him flinch. Then headlights. Through the window, he saw his parents' car pulling into the driveway. Relief washed over him so strongly he almost cried. He rushed to the door, fumbling with the locks, eager to throw himself into their arms. The door swung open, and there they were, his mom and dad, bags in hand, smiling tiredly. "Surprise," his mother said. "The wedding ended earlier than we thought." Ethan nearly shouted with relief. "You don't understand. There's something in the house. In the basement." But his father frowned. "Ethan, calm down. You look like you've seen a ghost." They stepped inside, closing the door behind them. Ethan noticed something odd. Their movements felt different, too slow, too deliberate. Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. When his mother placed her bag on the table, he swore he saw her hand twitch unnaturally, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. He backed away, whispering, "You're not them." His parents exchanged a glance. Then, in voices slightly distorted, they spoke in unison. "We told you, you're not alone." Ethan's stomach dropped. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. Were these really his parents, or had something else taken their place? The relief he had felt moments earlier vanished completely, replaced by pure terror. The house wasn't safe. His parents hadn't returned. something wearing their faces had. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. The two figures who looked like his parents stood calmly in the living room, their smiles stretched too wide, their eyes reflecting the faint glow of the phone's flashlight. They weren't supposed to be here. They weren't supposed to move like that. "Stay away from me," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. The imposters tilted their heads in unison, as if mimicking human behavior. Their voices blended, low and distorted, filling the room. "We've always been here, Ethan. You just never noticed." Terror gripped him. He stumbled backward toward the staircase, but every light switch he tried remained dead. Only his flashlight worked, flickering nervously. The shadows in the room stretched unnaturally, bending toward him like living things. Suddenly, he remembered the claw marks in the basement, the desperate scratches, the proof that someone had tried to escape. His parents, what if they had never left for the wedding? What if they were still down there? The realization hit him like ice. The things standing before him weren't his parents. They were the reason the basement was sealed, the reason the phone had whispered his name. As he turned to run, the parents spoke again, their voices warping into a chilling chorus. "Where are you going? This is your home now, with us." The flashlight flickered once more, and then went out. The screen went black. When the neighbors later recalled the weekend, they said they never saw Ethan again. The Millers returned days later, but when asked about Ethan, their answer was always the same, with unsettling smiles. "What boy?" "The house," they said, had always been empty.